The sound of scissors slicing through hair echoed in my ears as I stood frozen at the edge of the community pool. My 10-year-old son's screams pierced the summer air, while chunks of his beautiful long hair fell onto the hot concrete. I watched in horror as Karen, our HOA president, gripped my disabled child's shoulder with one hand, violently chopping at his hair with garden shears in the other. Neighbors stood paralyzed, smartphones recording but no one intervening. My son's face contorted in agony, not from physical pain, but from the overwhelming sensory violation that I knew would haunt him for months to come. For a child with his condition, this was not just a haircut. This was assault. This was trauma. This was the moment that would forever divide our peaceful suburban life into before and after. I lunged forward, my throat raw from screaming words I do not even remember, just as my phone buzzed in my pocket. My wife, the police chief. I answered with shaking hands, managing only 3 words. She attacked him. What happened next would send shockwaves through our entire community and teach Karen that some lines should never be crossed. Our story begins 3 years ago when Sarah and I found what we believed was our forever home. A modest 4-bedroom colonial in Pinecrest Estates with a fenced backyard that backed up to a small wooded area. Perfect for our son, Michael, who needed both space and privacy due to his sensory processing disorder. We had searched for months to find a place that could accommodate his special needs while still being close enough to both our workplaces. Sarah had recently been promoted to police chief of our small town, the first woman to hold the position. I worked from home as a software developer, which allowed me to be the primary caregiver for Michael. Our son was diagnosed with his condition when he was 4 years old. Bright lights, certain textures, and unexpected noises could trigger overwhelming responses. One of his comfort mechanisms was his hair. From an early age, he preferred to keep it long, often running his fingers through it when he felt anxious or overwhelmed. His therapist explained that this was a healthy, self-soothing technique, and we fully supported it. The neighbors initially seemed welcoming. The Johnsons to our left brought over a homemade lasagna our first week. The retired couple across the street, the Millers, offered to share their gardening tools when they saw me struggling with our overgrown lawn. But then there was Diane Westfield, who lived 3 doors down. She did not bring food. She brought a 3-ring binder containing the Homeowners Association bylaws, highlighted and tabbed. "Just so you understand our standards," she said with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. Her gaze drifted past me to Michael, who was arranging pine cones in a perfect line on our front walkway. "We have very specific rules about yard maintenance and external appearances. We pride ourselves on maintaining property values." I thanked her politely and placed the binder on our entry table, not thinking much of it at the time. Our first HOA meeting was scheduled for the following month, and Sarah and I decided we should attend to meet more neighbors and get involved in the community. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building next to the neighborhood pool. About 20 residents attended, most seeming disinterested in the proceedings. Diane stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, reading violations and issuing warnings with the seriousness of a judge handing down sentences. When she introduced herself as the HOA president, I noticed several neighbors exchanging glances. The meeting dragged on for 2 hours, mostly consisting of Diane talking about improper trash can placement, unapproved mailbox colors, and lawn height violations measured down to the 1/4 inch. Afterward, an older gentleman named Frank approached us as we were leaving. "Do not take Diane too personally," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "She has been president for 8 years. No one runs against her anymore, not worth the hassle." He smiled kindly at Michael, who was sitting quietly beside me, gently rocking and twirling a strand of his shoulder-length hair. "Beautiful boy you have there." That night, as Sarah and I prepared for bed, I mentioned the odd interaction with Frank. "Something tells me that Diane might be a bit power-hungry," I said, folding laundry while Sarah reviewed case files. "Every neighborhood has one," Sarah replied, not looking up from her papers. "As long as we follow the reasonable rules, we should be fine. We have enough on our plate with Michael starting at the new school next month." If only we had known then how wrong we were. If only we had recognized the warning signs. The peaceful life we thought we had found was balanced on a knife edge, and Diane Westfield was about to push us over. The first official HOA violation notice came exactly 3 weeks after we moved in. A bright yellow paper slipped into our mailbox stated that our garbage bins had been left at the curb 12 hours after collection. The notice cited Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the bylaws, and warned of a $25 fine for future infractions. I shrugged it off, making a mental note to be more prompt with the bins. The second notice arrived 5 days later. Our grass had exceeded the mandated 3-inch maximum height by approximately half an inch. This time, the violation came with a $50 fine and a 48-hour correction window. I measured our lawn with a ruler, finding the tallest blades to be 3 1/4 inches at most. Nevertheless, I mowed the lawn that afternoon, not wanting to create conflict. Sarah suggested we document everything, her law enforcement background kicking in. "Something does not feel right about the intensity of these violations," she said, creating a folder on her laptop labeled HOA Issues. Her instincts, as usual, were correct. By the 6-week mark, we had received 7 violation notices, each more nitpicky than the last. Our mailbox was apparently one shade too dark of navy blue. The flowers I planted in the front garden beds were not on the approved vegetation list. The wind chimes on our back porch were classified as noise pollution. Each violation came with increasingly stern language and higher fines. What became clear was that Diane was not just enforcing rules. She was watching our home with unsettling vigilance. Twice, I spotted her standing on the sidewalk in front of our house, making notes on her clipboard. Once, she photographed Michael and me as we played catch in the front yard. When I waved to her, she turned and walked away without acknowledgement. The targeting became more personal at the summer block party. Michael was having a good day. His anxiety was minimal, and he was actually interacting with a few neighborhood children by the snack table. I stood nearby, always vigilant, always ready to remove him from overwhelming situations. Diane approached, plastic cup of lemonade in hand, eyes fixed on Michael's hair, which now reached the middle of his back. "You know," she said loudly enough for surrounding neighbors to hear, "there are bylaws about maintaining a certain community aesthetic. Some might consider excessively long hair on boys to be unconventional for our neighborhood standards." I felt my jaw tighten. My son has sensory processing disorder. His hair is part of his therapy and self-regulation. Medical accommodations are protected under the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "I am simply concerned about maintaining our community values. Perhaps a compromise could be reached. A nice, clean-cut appearance would help him fit in better with the other children." "He is not concerned with fitting in," I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. "He is concerned with feeling safe in his own body, and as his father, I am concerned with protecting his rights." Later that week, Sarah and I received an email requesting our presence at a special HOA board meeting. The subject matter listed was discussion of aesthetic violations and potential medical exemptions. We arrived at the clubhouse to find not just the 5-member board, but also 15 other residents. Diane had turned our private matter into public spectacle. The board has reviewed your request for exemption from our community standards regarding appropriate appearance, Diane began, reading from a prepared statement. While we understand your son has special needs, we must consider the impact on property values and community cohesion. Sarah stepped forward, every inch the confident police chief. We have not requested an exemption because none is needed. Federal law supersedes HOA bylaws. Any attempt to enforce appearance standards that discriminate against my son's disability will result in a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The room fell silent. Several board members looked uncomfortable. A woman I recognized as the HOA treasurer leaned over to whisper something to Diane, who waved her off dismissively. "We will take your threat under advisement," Diane replied coldly. "But I must remind everyone that when you purchased homes in Pinecrest Estates, you agreed to abide by our standards. Special accommodations create a slippery slope that could affect everyone's property investments." As we left the meeting, several neighbors approached us quietly, expressing support but clearly afraid to do so publicly. "Diane has gotten 3 families fined out of the neighborhood in the past 2 years," one woman whispered. "Be careful." That night, as Sarah and I discussed our options, Michael appeared in our bedroom doorway, tears streaming down his face. "Do I have to cut my hair?" he asked, his small voice breaking. "Am I making trouble for everyone?" Sarah and I exchanged glances, our hearts breaking. We both moved to embrace him. "Never," I told him firmly. "You never have to change who you are to make someone like Diane comfortable. Not ever." Little did we know how prophetic those words would become, or how severely they would be tested. The annual Pinecrest Estates 4th of July pool party was the largest community event of the year. Despite our ongoing tensions with Diane, Sarah and I decided to attend. Michael had been looking forward to swimming, and his therapist encouraged maintaining normal activities rather than isolating ourselves further. Besides, Sarah would be on call that day, but she hoped to stop by for at least an hour between her official duties. The community pool was packed with families when Michael and I arrived. Red, white, and blue decorations hung from the fence surrounding the pool area. A large buffet table overflowed with potluck contributions, and the smell of grilling burgers filled the air. Michael clutched my hand tightly as we navigated through the crowd. He wore his favorite blue swim trunks and a rash guard shirt that helped minimize sensory discomfort from the sun on his skin. His long hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. "Remember our signal if things get too overwhelming," I reminded him gently. 3 taps on my arm meant he needed a break, no questions asked. He nodded, his eyes already fixed on the shimmering blue water. We found a relatively quiet spot at the far end of the pool and set up our chairs. Michael waded into the shallow end while I watched from the edge. For nearly an hour, everything went smoothly. He floated peacefully, occasionally splashing a little, but mostly enjoying the sensation of water around him. One of the few sensory experiences that usually calmed rather than overwhelmed him. I noticed Diane across the pool area, clipboard still in hand even at a holiday celebration. She seemed to be documenting violations. A glass bottle too close to the pool, children running instead of walking, someone's music playing too loudly. She had not approached us yet, but I caught her glancing our way several times. Around noon, Michael came to me, dripping wet and smiling. "Can I have some chips?" he asked, pointing to our bag. I realized I had forgotten to bring the towels from the car. "Let me get the towels first, buddy. I left them in the trunk. Do not get in the water until I get back, okay? Just sit here in the chair and wait for me. I will be right back." He nodded, settling into the chair. The parking lot was only about 50 yards away. I would be gone for 2 minutes, 3 at most. I jogged to the car, grabbed our beach towels, and was heading back when I heard it. A scream that I recognized immediately as Michael's. Not his typical overstimulation cry, but something different, something terrified. I dropped the towels and sprinted back to the pool area. What I saw next will be forever burned into my memory. Diane stood behind my son, who was now trapped in her grip. In her right hand were large garden shears, not small scissors, but the kind used for trimming hedges. Michael's ponytail holder lay on the ground, and chunks of his beautiful hair were scattered across the concrete. He was thrashing, trying to escape, his face contorted in absolute terror as she continued cutting violently at his hair. "Stop moving, young man," she was saying loudly. "This is for your own good. You will thank me when the other children stop making fun of you." For one eternal second I could not move, could not breathe, could not believe what I was witnessing. Then something primal took over. "Get away from him, my son," I roared, closing the distance between us in seconds. People turned to stare. Phones were raised, recording, but no one had intervened. Diane looked up, momentarily startled but not stopping. "He needs to learn to follow the rules like everyone else," she declared, snipping off another chunk of hair as Michael sobbed and tried to cover his head with his hands. I reached them and physically placed myself between Diane and my son, shoving her backward with more force than I intended. The shears clattered to the ground. Michael immediately curled into a protective ball, rocking and making the keening sound that indicated severe distress. "Michael," I said softly, trying to reach him through his panic, but he was already gone, retreated deep inside himself where the outside world could not hurt him anymore. His hair hung in jagged, uneven chunks around his face and shoulders. I gathered him into my arms as he trembled violently. "How dare you push me?" Diane shouted, regaining her balance. I was helping him. "Do you not see how the other children stare, how they whisper?" I was doing what any responsible adult would do. "You assaulted my child," I said, my voice shaking with rage as I held my sobbing son. "You put your hands on my disabled son and cut his hair against his will. Do you have any idea what you have just done to him? Do you understand what this means for someone with his condition?" Michael was now hyperventilating, his entire body rigid with trauma. The crowd had formed a circle around us, murmuring in shock. Some parents pulled their children away, while others stood filming the aftermath on their phones. "This is an HOA violation that has gone on long enough," Diane announced to the crowd, as if seeking public validation. Section 12, Paragraph 8 clearly states that all residents must maintain appearances in keeping with community standards. His hair has been in violation for months. "There is no such bylaw," called out Frank, the elderly man who had warned us that first day. "I have been on this board for 15 years. We have never had appearance standards for children." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone to call Sarah. When she answered, I could barely speak through my fury and fear. "She attacked him," was all I could manage to say. "Diane cut Michael's hair. He is in full meltdown. We are at the pool." "Do not move," Sarah replied, her voice instantly shifting into professional mode. "I am 3 minutes away." As I sat on the hot concrete holding my traumatized child, neighbors finally began to approach, offering water, towels, words of concern. Where had they been 30 seconds earlier when Diane was assaulting my son? Why had no one stepped in? The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Michael pressed his hands against his ears, rocking harder. I covered his ears with my hands, trying to buffer both the noise and the enormity of what had just happened to him. "It is okay," I whispered, though nothing was okay. Mom is coming. Mom is going to make it safe again. The police cruiser pulled into the community pool parking lot with lights flashing but siren now silent. Sarah stepped out, not in her casual clothes as expected for her brief visit to the pool party, but in full uniform. Her face was a professional mask that I recognized from the rare occasions I had seen her at crime scenes. She spoke briefly to the officers who had arrived ahead of her, then scanned the area until she spotted us. The crowd parted as she approached. When she reached us and saw Michael's condition, his unevenly chopped hair, his reddened face, his body still trembling in my arms, her professional facade cracked momentarily. She knelt beside us, gently placing her hand on our son's back. "Michael, it is Mom," she said softly. "You are safe now." He did not respond. He remained curled into himself, rocking rhythmically, his breathing still irregular. Sarah met my eyes over his head, and I saw the controlled fury there. "Where is she?" Sarah asked, her voice now devoid of emotion. I nodded toward the cluster of people near the clubhouse entrance. Diane stood with two other HOA board members, gesticulating wildly as she spoke. Incredibly, she still clutched her clipboard. Sarah stood and approached them, back straight, steps measured. "Diane Westfield?" she asked, though she knew exactly who Diane was. Diane turned, chin raised defensively. "Chief Roberts, finally. I was just explaining to these officers that this has been blown completely out of proportion. The boy needed a haircut. I was simply helping maintain community standards." Sarah removed handcuffs from her belt. "Diane Westfield, you are under arrest for assault on a vulnerable person, child endangerment, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." The color drained from Diane's face. "This is absurd. You cannot be serious. This is a civil HOA matter, not a criminal one." "You physically restrained a disabled child against his will and cut his hair with garden shears," Sarah replied, her voice carrying across the now silent pool area. "That is assault. That the child happens to be my son does not change the legal definition of your actions." "This is a conflict of interest," Diane protested as Sarah read her Miranda rights. "You cannot arrest me. You are emotionally involved." "My officers would have made the same arrest regardless of who the victim was," Sarah replied calmly. "But do not worry, I will be recusing myself from the investigation. Lieutenant Collins will be handling your case personally." As Sarah handed Diane off to another officer for processing, neighbors began approaching us, offering statements. "I have it all on video," said Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down. "She grabbed him from behind. He never provoked her." "She has been talking about doing this for weeks," admitted Mr. Lawson, the HOA treasurer. "At the last board meeting, she said someone needed to take care of the problem child with the hippie hair. We thought she was just venting. She told my daughter last week that she was going to fix that weird boy soon," added another parent whose name I did not know. Where had all these people been minutes ago? Why had they watched and recorded instead of intervening? The rage I felt threatened to overwhelm me as I continued holding Michael, who had now gone completely silent, his eyes vacant. Sarah returned to us, professional mask firmly back in place. "An ambulance is coming to evaluate Michael. I need to go to the station to file the paperwork and ensure everything is handled properly, but I will meet you at home as soon as possible." "Should we go to the hospital?" I asked, suddenly uncertain about the best course of action. "Let the EMTs evaluate him first," she said. "This may be primarily a psychological trauma rather than physical. Call Dr. Hansen. He might need an emergency therapy session." Before leaving, Sarah knelt once more beside Michael. "I love you, buddy," she whispered. "The bad lady is gone. She cannot hurt you again." For the first time since the assault, Michael's eyes focused briefly. He did not speak, but he reached for Sarah's hand and squeezed it once before retreating back into himself. The ambulance arrived minutes later. The EMTs were kind and spoke softly as they examined Michael, confirming that beyond a small nick on his ear from the shears, his physical injuries were minimal. The psychological trauma, however, was evident. "I recommend following up with his regular doctors," the female EMT told me gently. "He is experiencing acute stress response. Familiar surroundings might help more than a hospital right now." We declined transport to the hospital. I carried Michael to our car, his body still rigid in my arms. Several neighbors followed us to the parking lot, offering help, expressing outrage, sharing contact information to serve as witnesses. Their support felt hollow after their earlier inaction, but I accepted their information nonetheless. The drive home was silent except for the occasional whimper from Michael. Once home, he went straight to his sensory room, a space we had created with soft lighting, weighted blankets, and soothing textures. He curled up under his heaviest blanket, hands running repeatedly over the jagged ends of his hair. I called Dr. Hansen, Michael's therapist, who agreed to come to our home immediately despite it being a holiday. While waiting, I sat outside the sensory room door, listening to my son's quiet sobs. My phone began buzzing with text messages and calls. News traveled fast in our small community. Friends, colleagues, other parents from Michael's special education class, all reaching out with concern and offers of support. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah returned home, now in civilian clothes. Her professional composure had vanished. She sank onto the couch beside me, took my hand, and finally allowed herself to cry. "She is being charged with 4 separate counts," Sarah said after regaining her composure. "Lieutenant Collins is handling everything. I have completely recused myself." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we focus on Michael," she replied. "The legal system will handle Diane. But our son needs to know he is safe, that his body is his own, and that what happened today was wrong on every level." Dr. Hansen arrived shortly after, spending an hour with Michael in the sensory room. When he emerged, his expression was grave. "Michael has experienced significant trauma," he explained. "He feels violated, unsafe, and deeply confused about why someone would hurt him this way. We will need to increase his therapy sessions temporarily, and I would recommend keeping him home from summer activities for at least a week while we develop coping strategies." As Dr. Hansen was leaving, he paused at the door. "Document everything," he advised. "Photos of his hair, his emotional state, any regression in behaviors or skills. This will be important not just for his treatment but for any legal proceedings." That night, neither Sarah nor I slept much. We took turns sitting with Michael, who refused to leave his sensory room. Around midnight, he finally spoke his first words since the incident. "Am I in trouble?" he whispered, his voice small and uncertain. "Did I break a rule?" "No, sweetheart," I assured him, fighting back tears. "You did nothing wrong. The lady who hurt you broke the rules, not you." "Will my hair grow back?" he asked, fingers trembling as they touched the choppy ends. "Yes," I promised. "It will grow back even longer and more beautiful than before." He nodded slightly, then asked the question that broke my heart completely. "Are you and Mom going to protect me now?" "Always," I vowed. "We are never going to let anyone hurt you like that again." The morning after the incident, our living room transformed into an impromptu command center. Sarah sat at the dining table with her laptop, making calls to the district attorney's office. I documented Michael's condition, photographing his unevenly cut hair and making notes about his emotional state. He had refused breakfast and remained largely nonverbal, responding only to direct yes or no questions with slight nods or head shakes. At 9:30, our doorbell rang. Jason Martinez, a disability rights attorney Sarah had worked with on several community initiatives, stood on our porch with a leather briefcase and a gentle smile. "Sarah called me last night," he explained. "I canceled my holiday plans. This case takes priority." We settled in the living room as Michael remained in his sensory room with a trusted babysitter who had experience with special needs children. Jason listened intently as we recounted the events, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "What happened to your son represents multiple violations of both criminal and civil law," Jason explained. "The criminal case will proceed regardless of what you decide, but we should also file a civil lawsuit against both Diane personally and the HOA as an entity." "The HOA?" I questioned, "but it was Diane who attacked Michael." "From what you have told me, the HOA under her leadership has been systematically discriminating against your family because of Michael's disability. They have attempted to enforce non-existent appearance standards specifically targeting his adaptive hairstyle. They have created a hostile living environment. They are equally liable." Sarah nodded in agreement, her police training aligning with Jason's legal assessment. "We need to protect not just Michael but other vulnerable residents who might be targeted next." Jason began outlining our legal strategy. "First, we file for an emergency protective order keeping Diane at least 500 feet from your family and your property. Second, we initiate a civil rights lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. Third, we demand access to all HOA records, meeting minutes, and communications regarding your family." The process seemed overwhelming, but Jason assured us he would handle everything. "Your job is to take care of Michael. My job is to make sure justice is served, and that this never happens to another child in your community." As Jason prepared to leave, he paused. "The district attorney may request that Michael testify. Given his condition, we can petition for accommodations, perhaps allowing him to testify via closed-circuit television or having a support person present. But start preparing him for that possibility." The thought of Michael having to relive the trauma in court made my stomach clench. "He can barely speak about it to us," I said. "Is there any way to avoid putting him through that?" "With the video evidence multiple witnesses captured, it might not be necessary," Jason replied. "But courts often want to hear from the victim directly. We will do everything possible to make it as gentle an experience as possible if it comes to that." That afternoon, our home phone began ringing incessantly. Word had spread throughout the community and beyond. Local news vans parked at the entrance to our subdivision. Sarah contacted the police department to request periodic patrols past our house, concerned about potential harassment from Diane's supporters. Around 3 o'clock, we received an unexpected visitor. Frank, the elderly board member who had first warned us about Diane, came bearing a thick file folder. "These are copies of board meeting minutes from the past 3 years, he explained as we invited him inside. "Diane has been targeting families with undesirable elements, her words, not mine, since she became president. A military family with a service dog, an elderly widow who needed a wheelchair ramp, a family who put up a basketball hoop for their autistic son. You were not the first, but I am hoping you will be the last." The documents revealed a pattern of discrimination, so blatant it was shocking the HOA had not been sued before. Frank explained that most families either complied with Diane's demands or moved away, unable or unwilling to fight. "Why are you sharing this now?" Sarah asked, not unkindly. Frank's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was a coward. I saw what was happening but did nothing to stop it. I told myself I was just one vote on the board, that I could not make a difference. But watching what she did to your son, I cannot be silent anymore." As Frank left, we received a call from the district attorney's office. Diane had been released on bail but was under strict orders to have no contact with our family and to stay away from our property. Additionally, an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for the following evening to discuss the incident and potential removal of Diane from her position. That night I sat beside Michael's bed, watching him sleep fitfully. His therapist had prescribed a mild sedative to help him rest, but even in sleep, his hands kept reaching for his hair, his face contorting when he felt the jagged ends. Sarah joined me, sitting on the floor beside Michael's bed. "The news is covering the story," she said quietly. "They are calling it a case of HOA overreach turned criminal. Several disability advocacy groups have reached out offering support." "I never wanted this kind of attention for him," I whispered. "He already struggles with being different." "This is bigger than just Michael now," Sarah replied. "This is about making sure no HOA can terrorize families with special needs children. No child should ever be assaulted for being different." Before we left his room, Michael stirred slightly. "Dad," he murmured, half asleep, "can I wear a hat tomorrow? I do not want anyone to see my hair." "Of course, buddy," I assured him, tucking his blanket around him more securely. "Any hat you want." As we closed his door, Sarah and I exchanged determined looks. This fight was just beginning, and we would not rest until justice was served, not just for Michael, but for every family that had suffered under Diane's reign of discrimination. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the same room where Diane had once ruled with her clipboard and bylaws. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was completely different. The room was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The remaining board members sat at the front table, looking uncomfortable under the scrutiny of their neighbors. Sarah and I had decided to attend, leaving Michael at home with his grandparents who had driven in from 3 states away upon hearing the news. We sat in the back, wanting to observe without becoming the center of attention. It was a futile hope. As soon as we entered, conversations hushed and eyes turned toward us. The interim HOA president, a nervous-looking man named Howard, called the meeting to order. "We are here to address the incident that occurred at our community pool on July 4th involving former President Diane Westfield and a resident child." "His name is Michael," called out Mrs. Chen from the middle of the room. "Stop pretending this happened to a stranger. It happened to Michael Roberts, who lives on Maple Street, who waves to us when we walk our dogs, who always puts the neighbors' newspapers on their porches when they are left in the driveway." Howard cleared his throat. "Yes, of course. Michael Roberts. The board wishes to express our deepest regret for what occurred and to make clear that Diane's actions were not authorized or endorsed by the HOA." "That is not enough," shouted another resident. "You all enabled her for years. You watched her bully families out of this neighborhood." The meeting quickly descended into chaos as resident after resident stood to share their experiences with Diane's targeted harassment. The military family with the service dog, the widow who needed the wheelchair ramp, the basketball hoop family, and dozens more stories we had never heard, each one a family who had suffered in silence, believing they were alone in being targeted. Frank stood shakily, commanding attention despite his age. "I have served on this board for 15 years," he began, "and I bear responsibility for what happened to Michael and to all these families. I saw the pattern forming and did nothing. I was afraid of confrontation. I was afraid of Diane, but we cannot live in fear anymore." He produced copies of the documents he had shared with us, meeting minutes and emails showing the systematic discrimination that had become standard HOA practice under Diane's leadership. "I move that we not only remove Diane permanently from the board, but that we dissolve the current HOA structure entirely and start fresh," Frank proposed. "New bylaws, new leadership, new purpose." The motion passed unanimously. A 7-person committee was formed on the spot to draft new bylaws, with Sarah nominated to represent families with special needs children. The crowd applauded when she accepted. As the meeting concluded, something remarkable began happening. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance approached us, offering genuine apologies and support. Mrs. Miller, the elderly woman across the street, handed me a small, wrapped package. "For Michael," she explained. "It is a collection of soft hats my grandson wore during his chemotherapy. He does not need them anymore, and I thought they might help Michael feel less self-conscious until his hair grows back." Others offered meals, childcare, legal contacts, and most importantly, public testimony against Diane in both criminal and civil proceedings. The community that had once stood by silently was finding its collective voice. On our walk home, Sarah squeezed my hand. "Something good is coming from this horrible situation." 3 days later, a knock at our door revealed a group of neighborhood children holding handmade cards for Michael. Their parents stood behind them, encouraging but not forcing the interaction. When Michael cautiously approached the door, wearing one of Mrs. Miller's soft hats, the children did not stare or question. Instead, they simply asked if he might want to join them for a careful, quiet game of cards on the Johnsons' screened porch sometime. For the first time since the incident, Michael smiled slightly. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered. Word spread quickly beyond our neighborhood. Local disability advocacy groups organized a peaceful rally outside the county courthouse during Diane's arraignment. The district attorney, recognizing the public interest in the case, assigned her most experienced prosecutor to handle it. Our civil attorney reported that the HOA's insurance company was already reaching out about a potential settlement, recognizing the indefensible nature of what had occurred. Most importantly, within our community, yard signs began appearing. "Inclusive neighborhood, all abilities welcome, and diversity makes us stronger." The Community Playground Committee announced plans to install sensory-friendly equipment. 3 residents with professional backgrounds in special education offered to host an information night about various disabilities and accommodations. A neighborhood that had once enforced rigid conformity was transforming before our eyes into a community that celebrated differences. Michael's trauma had become a catalyst for change larger than anything we could have imagined. 6 months after the pool incident, we sat in a hushed courtroom as the judge prepared to announce Diane's sentence. The criminal trial had been mercifully brief, with the multiple videos of the assault and dozens of witness statements creating an overwhelming case against her. Michael had not needed to testify after all, sparing him the trauma of reliving the experience in a courtroom. Diane sat at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, her once immaculate appearance now subdued. She had pleaded guilty to reduced charges of assault on a vulnerable person and reckless endangerment, avoiding the more serious charges of child endangerment that could have resulted in prison time. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, looked directly at Diane as she delivered the sentence. "Ms. Westfield, Your actions demonstrated not just poor judgment but a fundamental disregard for the dignity and well-being of a child with disabilities. This court sentences you to 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, specifically with organizations serving individuals with disabilities, mandatory sensitivity training, and a restraining order preventing any contact with the Roberts family for a period of 5 years. Sarah gripped my hand tightly as the judge continued. Additionally, you are barred from serving in any official capacity on homeowners associations or similar community governance bodies for a period of 10 years. This court hopes that, through your service to the disability community, you will gain the empathy and understanding you so clearly lacked on July 4th. As we left the courthouse, reporters clustered around us, microphones extended. Sarah, composed as always, delivered a brief statement. Today is not about vengeance but accountability. We hope this case sends a message that individuals with disabilities deserve respect and protection under the law. Our family now looks forward to healing and moving on. The civil case had been settled 2 months earlier. The HOA's insurance company, recognizing the indefensible nature of the discrimination, had agreed to a substantial settlement that we placed in a trust for Michael's future needs. More importantly, they had agreed to fund extensive disability awareness training for all HOA boards in the county and to review and revise discriminatory bylaws. 1 year after the incident, our neighborhood hosted its first annual inclusion celebration. The community pool where the assault had taken place was now adorned with colorful banners reading, "All abilities welcome." Children of various abilities played together on the newly installed adaptive playground equipment. Information booths staffed by disability advocates provided resources to residents. Michael, now 11, sat at the face-painting station, his hair once again flowing past his shoulders. He still had occasional nightmares about the incident, still worked with his therapist on processing the trauma, but day by day, he was reclaiming his confidence and sense of safety. "Dad," he called, waving me over, "look what Emma drew on my arm." I smiled at the colorful puzzle piece symbol of autism awareness painted on his skin. "It is beautiful, buddy. Are you having fun?" He nodded, his eyes clearer and more present than they had been in months. "I like our neighborhood now. People understand me better." Sarah joined us, off-duty and relaxed in casual clothes. "The new HOA president wants to speak with us when we have a moment. They are drafting a formal accommodation policy and want our input." The new HOA board, led by Frank and 6 other residents representing diverse backgrounds and needs, had transformed the organization from an instrument of control into a resource for community support. Property values had not plummeted as Diane had feared. In fact, our neighborhood had become highly sought after specifically because of its reputation for inclusivity and accommodation. As we walked home that evening, Michael skipping slightly ahead of us, Sarah slipped her arm through mine. "Sometimes I still get so angry thinking about what happened, but then I look at all the good that has come from it." "From something terrible came something beautiful," I agreed, "but I would still undo it in a heartbeat if I could spare him the trauma." "I know," she said, "but since we cannot change the past, I am grateful we could change the future, not just for Michael, but for every family who will move into this neighborhood from now on." At home, Michael asked if he could sleep in his own room rather than the sensory room for the first time in months. As I tucked him in, he ran his fingers through his hair, a self-soothing gesture that no longer carried the weight of trauma it once had. "Dad," he asked, his voice sleepy, "do you think that mean lady learned anything?" I thought about Diane. now completing her community service at a local center for children with disabilities. The center director had reported that she was initially resistant, but had recently shown signs of genuine growth and understanding. "I think she is learning," I replied carefully. "Sometimes people do terrible things because they do not understand. The important thing is that we helped make sure she cannot hurt anyone else the way she hurt you." He nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Good. Everyone deserves a second chance to learn." From the wisdom of my son, who had every right to be unforgiving, came the most profound lesson of all. True justice was not found in punishment alone, but in transformation of individuals, of communities, of systems that allow discrimination to flourish. As I closed his bedroom door, I smiled at the sign he had made and hung there himself. "All kinds of minds welcome here." Our family had been through a nightmare, but we had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more determined to create a world where differences were not just tolerated but celebrated. Sometimes, from the darkest moments come the brightest possibilities for change. Our story was proof of that enduring truth.